Hey everybody, it's Friday Eve. Can I get a what, right? So my name's Kevin. This is Verbum Day, where I share my reflections on the daily gospel. So welcome, and let's jump in. I bet you're never gonna guess where we're at right now. Mark chapter 8, right? So today's verses are verse 27 through 33, and I'm gonna read them right now. Verse 27, Jesus and his disciples went on to the village around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." The gospel of the Lord. That's a lot. Okay, so I don't have a ton of Greek for you today. Some of these gospels, look, they're my reflections, right? And some of them really tend towards Ignatian spirituality, which is something that we'll talk about from time to time, but something that I really, really love. And some of them tend towards more scholar, more Greek. But today was very Ignatian and very philosophical. So I'm just going to share with you the things that really jumped out at me. First, I want to tell you that the journey from Bethsaida to Caesarea Philippi is about a 12-hour walk, okay? And so why do I point that out? The significance of it simply is here Jesus is with his boys, and they're on this very long, extended walk in a desert, right? And what happens on that? We start talking, right? And so the first thing I was thinking about was like, imagine just being on the way with Jesus. You know, imagine, hey, when you spit on the dude's eyes back there, and hey, when the lady touched your outer garment and she was healed from a 12-year ailment. Hey, back there when you said, eat my flesh, drink my, just imagine the conversations that go on. And some of my favorite writings in the gospel, it takes place when they're on a journey from one place to the next, because that's what family is, and that's what teaching is, right? And it reminds me of the old Jewish saying that says something to the effect of, I'm sure I'm butchering this, but you should be following your rabbi so close that you're covered in the dust of his sandals, right? And I can just imagine if it was me, every single time I got Jesus alone or on a way, he would be like, "Kevin, I have to pee by myself," right? And clearly he has to pray by himself too a lot. But I'd be like, "Hey, one more thing, Jesus, right? What about this? And what about that?" And so that's the setting for me in my mind when they're on this. And then Jesus goes, "So who are people saying that I am?" Interesting. I could say a lot about that. Why was he concerned with what people were saying about him? Well, maybe he knew his passion was coming and all that stuff. And for timing purposes, he just wanted to make sure that it wasn't getting out too much who he was. Maybe he was just genuinely interested in his hometown or his nation and his people and how they viewed him and if they were connecting the dots. Who knows the mind of Christ, right? But what happens next is one of my favorite things Jesus has ever said. He looks at the disciples and he says, "Who do you say that I am?" Now see, that's a question. And the question behind the question is, who do you really think I am? And for me, this is a question that every single follower of Jesus eventually has to answer for themselves. Who do you say that I am? Not what have you read, not what have you studied, not what your grandma taught you or what you regurgitate from your daddy. But who do you say that I am? And I can tell you, for me, that's what the journey of faith is all about, is figuring out how to answer that question. Now, look, you got people in your life, they'll be like, oh, no, he's all about, he's the Son of God. And they'll, okay, great. God bless them. It's a little deeper for me, It's something that I wrestle with. I always go back to C.S. Lewis and his book, Mere Christianity. Let me read an excerpt. I'm going to have to look at it because it's too long for me to memorize. ADHD, all that. He says, I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. Why? Well, a man who was merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of the man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon. Or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us, and he did not intend to. So what's C.S. Lewis saying here? He's saying Jesus can't simply be a moral teacher because he claimed to be God. And so if he isn't God, he's led millions and millions and millions of people astray through, salvation history. For 2,000 years, he's led people away from God. So that's not a good moral teacher. So we can't sit on the fence and go, oh, Jesus is a good guy, and, oh, I love his teachings, but no, he's one of those that you have to, or get off the pot, right? He either is who he says he is, or he's a liar or a lunatic, but there is no in between. That's interesting. So again, that's what faith is to me, is the journey anyway, is you're working out who he is. Now, who did Peter say he was? Peter looks at him and goes, you're the Messiah. And we know this is an abbreviated version of where later, I think in Matthew, he says, you're the Messiah. And he tells him, you're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and I will give you the keys to the kingdom and all that good stuff. And there's all kinds of debates as to why it's not said here and this, that, and the other. But the one that I found that really works, that makes the most sense to me, is Mark is actually the first gospel written. And it was written either by Peter or like with a lot of Peter's insight. So in other words, what is focused on all through the Gospel of Mark is like not Peter's accomplishments and great things and all this, but his failures and his shortcomings, right? And that kind of suggests to the authenticity that Peter had a lot of say in writing it. So that works for me. You can do what you want. Peter saying that he was the Messiah, and then Jesus is like, hey, don't tell anybody yet, because Jesus has something to do and something to fulfill before he's handed over. Okay. The other thing I want to point out is about the second part of the gospel. They're on this road, and golly, Peter feels fantastic because he's just like, hey, you're the Messiah. And he's like, hey, you're awesome and all that. But then what happens next? So then Jesus starts to explain that he's got to die, right? He starts to explain his passion. He's like, I got to die, and then I'm going to be resurrected, and everything's going to be cool. And Peter is not having it. Peter's like, hold up, wait a minute, right? Hold on for just one day, right? Wilson Phillips, 90s. All right. So he's like, hold on. We just established you're the Messiah, the chosen one, the Christ, the anointed one. You can't be getting murdered, right? And then what happens? Jesus, he takes Jesus aside and rebukes him and goes, dude, what are you talking about? And then Jesus says to the disciples, get behind me, Satan. So it's he has enough sense to kind of take Jesus aside and rebuke him. Jesus brings him back in public and goes, you're Satan right now because you're in the way of what my Father wants to do. Okay. You may think that that's strong, but I just want to go over something. It's a philosophy I've learned in a class I'm taking on a 20th century theologian named Hans Ur von Balthasar, right? And he talks about one of these principles, and I'm going to have to kind of read it because it's Latin and I'm not a very educated man. The principle that I'm learning about is called in tantu similitudine maior dissimilitudo. Okay, I just butchered that. But here's what it means in Latin. For however similar we think God is to humanity, and some of that may be true, but he is far more dissimilar to us than he is similar. And why is it important to understand that? Because what makes sense to us isn't necessarily making sense to God. And what God is doing in his will and his plan may be total mystery to us, or it may actually really cause us to think it's a bad mistake. Stop for a minute and think about that. How many times have you thought something really, really bad was happening in your life and it turned out to be God? Okay? So however similar we believe God is to humanity, he's much, much more dissimilar. And it's just really important to keep that in mind, because the moral of this gospel is you can go from being the first pope to the devil in one road trip, right? So may all of us have the courage of Peter to say, yes, you're the Messiah today. You're my Christ, Jesus. You rule and reign in my heart. And may we also keep in mind that we can be as off as Peter was, and know that however similar I think I am to Jesus, Jesus is so much more dissimilar to me. It's kind of silly. So may we today keep in mind what our mamas said. His ways are higher than ours. Grace and peace be with y'all.